So I was wondering, do you know why Santa Claus is so jolly? Well, he knows where all the naughty girls live at.
From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where there is nothing abnormal about eating turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes for 10 meals in a row, and only a crazy person would make any suggestion to the contrary. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radius. So good of you to join us tonight. Coming up on a very special Thanksgiving weekend edition of the Worst People in the Whole Wide World Weekly Update, we focus on the forces of cultural erasure and societal decay, for whom the upcoming month constitutes the most important 30-day period on their calendar. It's the month each year when they take great delight in lecturing us about how we should be very deeply ashamed of our history and our culture and our traditions, how all the things we celebrate at this time of year are terribly problematic, founded on the depraved evils of racism and xenophobia and the dreaded settler colonialism, and how we should really stop celebrating them altogether, because the only way to find true happiness and true enlightenment is to sit around eating bugs and dirt and flagellating ourselves for being such terrible, awful, bigoted istophobes. And we know what this is all about, really, obviously. In their heart of hearts, these woke progressive scolds don't really care about the moral and ethical rectitude of their position. They don't actually give one single damn one way or the other about the history and the traditions they seek to marginalize and erase. In point of fact, they view that history and those traditions as merely a series of inconvenient impediments that have to be swept aside so they can be replaced with the globalist neo-Marxist utopia that they, our self-appointed intellectual overlords, seek to impose. The biggest obstacle standing in the way of that project, just as they have always been, are religion and the nuclear family union, and to a lesser extent, the civic mythologies by which nations define themselves and from which they gain their cultural coherence. All of those things have to be got rid of in order for the globalist neo-Marxist project to have any chance at success. Every form of Marxist collectivism seeks to erase history and tradition and family and religion, because only after societies have been reduced to a collection of atomized individuals can they be rebuilt into a Marxist collective for which government and bureaucracy are the only objects of loyalty and veneration. Which is why they focus so heavily on this time of year, for this is the time of year when family and religion and historical tradition are the most stubbornly persistent. But these phenomena of cultural erasure take on decidedly different forms here in the United States than they do over in the United Kingdom, which may be, at least in part, a function of the fact that here in America, we have what we call the holiday season, which lasts for a month or more and is bookended by Thanksgiving and Christmas, whereas in the mother country, they just have the proverbial 12 days of Christmas. So maybe it's instructive for our present purposes to go all the way back to the beginning, to the English Puritans who set sail for the New World aboard the Mayflower in 1620 and subsequently participated in the event that is now popularly known as the First Thanksgiving, which is a fun bit of national civic mythology that was largely an invention of the 20th century after Thanksgiving had already become an official holiday. But there is nothing wrong with having a national civic mythology. It's difficult to have a society and a culture without such things. And if you don't have a society and a culture and a civic mythology, then you are just a nondescript collection of atomized individuals ripe for the picking by the forces of neo-Marxism. Is it correct to say the English Puritans who sailed for America, the folks we came to call the Pilgrims, were religious dissidents whose primary aim was to go to a place where they could worship as they saw fit? Well, it might be a little bit simplistic, but it's not wrong. The Puritans thought the English Reformation of the previous century hadn't gone far enough. They thought the Church of England was still uncomfortably close to popery, and it retained too many of the accoutrements of Catholicism for their taste, and they may have had a fair point. Henry VIII didn't break from the Catholic Church because he was a Protestant at heart. He broke with the Catholic Church because he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn, and the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. But in terms of doctrine and liturgy, he remained, by all accounts, much closer to a Catholic than a Protestant for the remainder of his life. As far as the Puritans were concerned, they wanted England to practice a version of Protestantism that was closer to Martin Luther's vision, the one that was taking hold and gaining traction in Germany and Scandinavia and the Low Countries at that time. But the thing that really scared them was the prospect that England might once again have a Catholic monarch, which would cause them to be subject to arrest and execution as they had been during the reign of Queen Mary. And now, since the death of good Queen Bess in 1603, we have had a Scottish king, and we don't trust the Scots all that much. Sure, Scotland had a Protestant Reformation just like we did, and sure, they forced the Catholic Mary Queen of Scots to abdicate the throne in favor of her infant son, who was then raised a Protestant, who's now also the King of England. But King James has never been quite Protestant enough for the liking the Puritans, and it's 1620 now. He's not in the best of health. He might not live all that much longer, and his heir apparent, the future Charles I, is suspected of having some distressingly crypto-Catholic proclivities. We've even heard talk that he might take a French Catholic wife. So what if this guy is a secret practitioner of popishness? We can't run that risk, say the Puritans. So let's hire a ship and sail for the New World, and we will take our chances there. It is the only prudent thing to do. And of course, the big irony in all of this is that after the Pilgrims decamped from Massachusetts, back home in England, the Puritans kept gaining more membership and more political power, so much so that by the 1640s, they were able to fight and win a civil war against the aforementioned Charles I and to cut off his head, take over the country, and abolish the monarchy altogether, for a time at least. So you can't help wondering how the Pilgrims and their descendants felt in 1650 when they have spent the last 30 years just trying to scrape by and stay alive in Plymouth Colony, and now their compatriots are wielding supreme political power back home. But then, if not for the event that we now call the First Thanksgiving, there probably wouldn't have been any Pilgrims left alive to be regretful. It's an event that wasn't very widely known to the public consciousness until after Thanksgiving became a national holiday in the 1890s. It had been a tradition for 30 years leading up to that, ever since Lincoln proclaimed in 1863 that we should take the last Thursday of November off and give thanks to divine providence that the war is starting to trend in a favorable direction and it looks like we're probably going to win. But it's not until the Grover Cleveland administration that it becomes an official holiday and effectively a 4-day weekend each year. And when it gets enshrined on the calendar, that's when we start building up a civic mythology around it. And the story of the feast with the Pilgrims and the Indians made a great ingredient in that stew. It was a way we could take a new holiday and back project it all the way to the earliest beginnings of our history. And it's a great story anyway. There's every reason why it should be part of our national civic mythology. The Indians are looking at these English settlers. They're trying to farm North American land with English crops and English agricultural methods, and they're saying, clearly these white men are idiots. and they will all die if we don't save them from themselves. So they passed on their knowledge to the white men, taught them which crops to grow, how best to grow them, and after the first successful harvest, when it was clear that the settlers had now gained the ability to sustain themselves and wouldn't all die of starvation, the two peoples had a big feast together as a show of mutual understanding and gratitude and goodwill. And once that story was woven into the fabric of the Thanksgiving holiday, Thanksgiving became an altogether more important thing in the American popular consciousness. By the 1910s and 20s, it had become common practice in every American elementary school for the children to stage a reenactment of that first Thanksgiving, half of them dressed as pilgrims, half dressed as Indians, doing a cute little pageant that promoted both historical literacy and cross-cultural understanding. And we kept doing it for generations. It became an indispensable part of our holiday tradition, until the forces of cultural Marxism decided that we couldn't do that anymore because it's culturally insensitive, don't you know? We can't promote any sort of observance that leads small children to believe European colonialism was anything other than 100% cruel and dastardly and monstrous and evil. And those forces of erasure have been in the ascendant since before the start of this century, but it's starting to seem like their efforts might be finally starting to run out of steam. It's a drill to which we have grown so accustomed for so long, where we begin the holiday season with lectures about the evils of Thanksgiving, and we end it with lectures about the evils of Christmas, that if you're under the age of 30, you might reasonably conclude this is just how we have always observed the holidays. The forces of cultural Marxism succeeded for a good number of years in effectively making the word Christmas completely verboten in the public square. We've become completely inured to seeing TV commercials that are veritably dripping with the visual imagery of Christmas, but in which the word Christmas is never spoken. But in the last 2 or 3 years, and maybe this is just me being naively optimistic, but I have seen the word Christmas slowly creeping back into the advertising sphere. And the scolding and the lectures and the finger-wagging self-righteousness that we have all gotten so used to hearing at this time of year from the woke progressive crowd, it seems to be, slowly but surely, getting just a little bit less heavy-handed and a little bit less all-consuming. The incessant stream of articles we normally see during Thanksgiving week in the leftist press about how you should go home for the holidays and scream at your family members for having the wrong political opinions seems to be slightly less incessant this year. Make no mistake, though, there is still a movement afoot, a movement that's had an entire industry built up around it, that seeks to criminalize the celebration of our history and to delegitimize any observances that provide us with a material connection to our cultural memory and our national civic mythology. It will not be defeated easily, but it will be defeated as long as people retain sufficient reserves of moral courage to treat the stupid diktats of our self-appointed societal overlords with the contempt and the mockery they so richly deserve. But it's interesting to note, I think, that back in the mother country, the effort to erase the national civic mythology has been far less of a holiday-focused exercise. For example, the de facto prohibition of the word Christmas has never existed in Britain to nearly the same extent that it has here in America. And the effort to rewrite the historical record of the distant past to make it better conform to fashionable present-day notions of political correctness has been pursued less doggedly over there than it has been over here. But then this could largely be a function of the fact that their country has a much longer history than our country does. The rewriting of British history seems to have much more to do with the bizarre practice of race-swapping real-life historical figures, which you don't need me to tell you about if you have seen pretty much any BBC historical drama from the last 10 years or so. But I guess this is just the way things are in BBC land now. There is a new series that just came out about William the Conqueror and Harold Godwinson, the topic we discussed at some length on this program just a few weeks ago, and I am watching the first episode, and it seems good so far, and then, slowly but surely, you start seeing black people in the background, and then as the episodes go on, the race washing gets so severe, you wind up with a scene that depicts the royal court of Edward the Confessor as being full of blacks and Indians and Mexicans and God knows what else. They have made early medieval England look like a United Colors of Benetton ad. Who is this for? What does it seek to achieve? How does it make the world a better place? Well, I can't say for sure, but there seems to be an unmistakable undercurrent that says, if your country's history is full of white people, then your country's history is bad and evil and racist, and you shall not be permitted to view that history in the same way that your forebears have viewed it. I had pretty much the same experience when I watched the second season of Wolf Hall last year, the sequel to one of the best television productions of all time, in my opinion, which wound up completely wrecking itself by this practice of racially diverse stunt casting. The BBC has also gifted the world with a black Anne Boleyn and a black Queen Charlotte in recent years, and there are probably other examples too. Those are just the ones I can think of offhand. When they are confronted about such things, the producers, quite dishonestly, refer to this practice as colorblind casting. But if that were true, it wouldn't only work in one direction. It wouldn't be exclusively an exercise in race-swapping white historical figures for black actors. If you want me to buy the colorblind casting claim, give me a call when Jake Gyllenhaal gets cast to play Martin Luther King Jr., or when they remake Roots with a cast of Irish and Vietnamese slaves, or when a one-legged transgender Eskimo plays Nelson Mandela. We haven't yet seen this phenomenon rear its head in any U.S. historical dramas, and I knock on wood as I say that, hoping the next movie on the life of Abraham Lincoln isn't going to depict him being married to Queen Latifah. So what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is this. No goddamn neo-Marxist piece of shit cultural vandal gets to dictate to you how you are allowed to interact with your country's history and the people and events in it. Nobody has the right to demand that you view the heroes and the personages of the past exclusively through the lens of dumb, woke 21st century social mores. And nobody gets to call you names and cast aspersions upon your character for being proud of the place you are from, for being proud of its culture and its traditions, or for taking umbrage when you see that history being portrayed falsely and dishonestly. Nobody owns your country and its history and its collective memory except you. And that's just about all I've got for today. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving with the people you love. Thanks ever so much for your kind attention. And with that, I transmit you into the loving care of my distinguished colleague, your illustrious co-host, the one and only, your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.
Tactical nuke incoming!
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Blast Radius. We are going to basically go over some topics we covered a few months ago, go over some topics we covered a few weeks ago, and make a prediction. The little one. Nothing serious, so don't get your panties in a twist about it. Cap, tell me something. Something. Just something.
My panties are already in a twist. I don't know if that's a problem or not.
It's only if it starts making you talk a little bit higher. We'll talk.
I knew I shouldn't have worn a tee back tonight.
Nice. All right, so where do you want to start? Do you want to start at Edward the Confessor? Do you want to go over the Saint Nick thing? Do you want to discuss the absolute fabrication of the Thanksgiving? Where do you want to go?
I would love to start with Saint Nicholas. If you want to start with Saint Nicholas, I actually learned more about the real life Saint Nicholas in the 15 minutes before we went on the air than I had ever known before. Especially the Church of Saint Nicholas. That man, I would love to go to the. I'm not going to say I would love to go to the southern coast of Turkey, but if there was ever some circumstance where I found myself involuntarily being in the southern coast of Turkey, I would love to go to the Church of St. Nicholas, because who doesn't want to see a building that was built in 520 AD over the burial site of the guy who inspired the Santa Claus story? And did you know that the Santa Claus story has its origins in child sex trafficking? I didn't know that, but now I do know that.
Here, let's do it this way. Go. I'm joking. Seriously. So everybody's heard the basic story of Santa Claus. He's this nice old guy, lives at the North Pole. He enslaves a bunch of elves and some really crazy mutant deer to deliver toys to all the good little girls and boys by climbing down their chimney into their living room, hijacking their milk and cookies, and then dipping out like a thief in the night.
And in doing so, he consigns millions of apartment dwellers to have to explain to their kids how Santa Claus gets into their house when they don't have a chimney.
Right. And so the world over, children are confused, and I thank you for it. What would you like to tell us about him?
Little is known about the historical St. Nicholas. The earliest accounts of his life were written centuries after his death and probably contain legendary elaborations. You know, as tends to happen when you're writing about people who lived in the the 6th century AD. He is said to have been born in the Anatolian seaport of Patara, Lycia in Asia Minor to wealthy Christian parents. In one of the earliest attested and most famous incidents from his life, he is said to have rescued 3 girls from being forced into prostitution by dropping a sack of gold coins through the window of each of their houses each night for 3 nights so that their father could pay a dowry for each of them. Other early stories tell of him calming a storm at sea, saving 3 innocent soldiers from wrongful execution, and chopping down a tree possessed by a demon, which is always, I think, a useful service to the community. In his youth, he is said to have made a pilgrimage to Egypt and Syria, Palestina. Shortly after his return, he became Bishop of Myra. He was later cast into prison during the persecution of Diocletian, but was released after the accession of Constantine, which stands to reason since Constantine was your first Christian emperor, so he probably didn't want to be keeping very many Christian saints in prison. St. Nicholas is the patron saint of, get ready for a long list, sailors, merchants, archers, repentant thieves, but not unrepentant ones, so it's an important distinction. Children, brewers, pawnbrokers, toy makers, unmarried people, and students in various cities and countries around Europe. Patron saint of toy makers. There you go. There it is right there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I want you to stop and think about that list of people. Any one of those people could be involved in scamming you.
Oh, yes. I didn't even know pawnbrokers had a patron saint. Do pawnbrokers need a patron saint? It doesn't seem like an occupation that is very closely attached to faithful religious observance, but what do I know?
There's a certain religious observance amongst pawnbrokers that I've noticed.
But the fact that he is the patron saint of children and toy makers, and he saved those girls from being sold into prostitution. It seems like we've got a fun list of the first few primordial ingredients for the Santa Claus legend, doesn't it?
Yup. Nuxus says he sounds like a demon. I mean, we'll get into that in a minute. I'm actually going to take a different tact on it, but go ahead.
As we were talking about backstage before the show started, there is an early list, for whatever it's worth, that says he was in attendance at the First Council of Nicaea in the year 325, that would be kind of awesome. Who knows if it's true or not? But conversely, he is never mentioned in any writings by people who were at the council. But it seems like we probably don't have the exhaustive list of all those writings since the thing happened in 325, but who's to say one way or the other? Late unsubstantiated legends claim that he was temporarily defrocked and imprisoned during the council for slapping a heretic. Another famous late legend tells how he resurrected 3 children who had been murdered and pickled in brine by a butcher, planning to sell them as pork during a famine. And now the legend of Santa Claus turns right into a horror movie before anybody could know.
I say let's roll with it. I bet we could get this on Tubi by freaking New Year.
Pickling children in brine is a hell of a thing.
That's diabolical, especially selling them as pig meat. And it would work. That's the sucky part. It's basically pickled pig's feet.
Fewer than 200 years after Nicholas's death, the St. Nicholas Church was built in Myra under the orders of Theodosius II over the site of the church where he had served as bishop, and his remains were moved to a sarcophagus in that church. In 1087, while the Greek Christian inhabitants of the region were subjugated by the newly arrived Muslim Seljuk Turks, and soon after the beginning of the East-West Schism, which of course is when the Byzantine Empire splits off from the Western Roman Empire, a group of merchants from the Italian city of Bari removed the major bones of Nicholas's skeleton from his sarcophagus in the church without authorization, and brought him to their hometown. What a bunch of bastards. Where they are now enshrined in the Basilica di San Nicola. The remaining bone fragments from the sarcophagus were later removed by Venetian sailors and taken to Venice during the First Crusade. So in other words, this guy's bones are all over the freaking place now, aren't they?
Pause. The Venetians, man. They did say Phoenicians, right?
Venetians, Venice.
Venice. Venetians.
Yeah.
Okay. I was a little off base there for a second, but listen, these second guys who come along, these Venusians, if you will, show up with a dustpan and a fucking, and just sweep up the last 400 years of freaking dust and call it St. Nick's Bowl.
But it's fascinating to consider how you get from this guy to the guy that we call Santa Claus today, which and the intermediary, of course, is the Dutch legend of Sinterklaas, which I think our name for him, Santa Claus, is simply a anglicized bastardization of his Dutch name, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, like based on Saint Nicholas, patron saint of children. He's got other Dutch names that I can't pronounce, and the Feast of Sinterklaas celebrates the name day of St. Nicholas on the 6th of December, which is reasonably close to Christmas, I guess. The Sinterklaas feast is celebrated annually with the giving of gifts on St. Nicholas Eve, 5 December in the Netherlands, and on the morning of St. Nicholas Day, 6 December in Belgium, Luxembourg, Western Germany, and Northern France. The tradition is also celebrated in some territories of the former Dutch Empire, including Aruba. They even got the Arubans in on this stuff. Imagine that. So yeah, but that lines up with the thing I was talking about in the monologue of where the territories where Martin Luther's brand of Protestantism first gained its strongest foothold in terms of parts of Germany and Scandinavia and the Low Countries and all of those various places.
Is it ironic that the places where it caught grip were the places with less defendable locations?
It probably is not a coincidence. But it's interesting to consider that Protestantism made absolutely no inroads into France or Spain, even though it had such great successes in pretty much every other area of Europe. The French and the Spaniards were like, no, God damn it, we are Catholic till we die. We are ride or die with the Pope. And of course, the Italians felt the same way because the Pope was one of their guys. But consider all the wars and all the bloodshed that ensued from the Protestant Catholic schism, and hell, even just in England. But on the continent, it was even worse. And like I mentioned, in England, it was more a matter of the king wanted to get an annulment. The Pope wouldn't give him an annulment, and so he broke off from the church, established the Church of England. Even though, doctrinally and liturgically, he kind of always thought of himself as a Catholic, but business is business. You got to do what you got to do. I need to get rid of my wife. I need to produce an heir. I've got this other wife that I want to marry, and so I need some bastard to give me an annulment or a divorce. And if I have to break from the Church of Rome in order to get it, then goddamn it, I'm the king. That's what I get to do. Little did he know he was going to have 5 more wives after that one? So yeah, he was really setting himself up for a whole bunch of shit, and he would only produce one male heir who would die at the age of 15. So, well done with all of that, Hank. Really, really good showing.
I'm proud of you. At least he had one.
Yeah, at least he managed the one.
All right.
And all that trouble he went through, and then you get into the whole Lady Jane Grey story. What the hell did she ever do to anybody to get her head cut off? That poor girl.
Yeah. I try not to think about that period of English history too much.
I know. And can you imagine being her and receiving the news that the dying 15-year-old king, who is your cousin and someone, with whom you have a friendly acquaintance, if not an outright friendship, has determined that you are going to be the inheritor of the throne, even though you probably don't want to be the queen of anything. You're probably perfectly happy just being a teenage girl and the daughter of an earl and whatever it is that teenage daughters of earls do in the 16th century. But suddenly you are informed that you have to be the king or the queen, and the king is also survived by his 2 daughters, of course, Mary and Elizabeth, who also want very badly to inherit the throne, and they are not going to take kindly to to the dead King Edward VI, naming you as his successor, and they also have more military power than you do, and they are going to jail you and cut your head off just as quick as they possibly can, which is why we call her the 9-Day Queen.
Just as quick as they possibly can. Yes, sir. That is exactly how it plays out. Oh, Lord. Then what happens?
Oh, here you go. This is where we get into some slightly racist stuff here with Sinterklaas. Sinterklaas is assisted by Zwarte Piet, which is Dutch for Black Pete, a helper dressed in Moorish attire and in a black painted face. Zwarte Piet first appeared in print as the nameless servant of St. Nicholas in St. Nicholas and His Servant, published in 1850 by Amsterdam school teacher Jan Schenkman. However, the tradition appears to date back to at least as far as the early 19th century. Zwarte Piet's colorful dress is based on 16th century noble attire with a ruff and a feathered cap. He is typically depicted carrying a bag which contains candy for the children. Hey, little girl wants some candy? Which he tosses around, a tradition supposedly originating in the story of St. Nicholas saving 3 young girls from prostitution by tossing. We heard that story already, so yeah, that story seems to persist all the way down through the legend. It seems to have much to do with saving little girls from child sex trafficking. And who knew? I didn't know that 1 hour ago.
I kind of did.
Traditionally, he would also carry a birch rod, a chimney sweep's broom made from willow branches, which he used to spank children who had been naughty. So there we get the whole naughty or nice thing. But I don't think Santa Claus actually beats you for being naughty. He just doesn't give you presents. So I guess we have sanitized the story a little bit since then. Some of the older Sinterklaas songs make mention of naughty children being put in Zwarte Piet's bag and being taken back to Spain. Jesus Christ. This part of the legend refers to the times that the Moors raided the European coasts, and as far as Iceland, to abduct the local people into slavery. This quality can be found in other companions of St. Nicholas, such as Krampus and Perry Foothard. In modern versions of the Sinterklaas feast, however, Zwarte Piet no longer carries the rod, and children are no longer told they will be taken back to Spain in his bag if they have been naughty. That might be a useful thing, though, if you're trying to get your kids to go to sleep on Christmas Eve. You don't want Black Pete to come and beat you with a rod and take you back to Spain and sell you to the Muslims, do you? So you better fucking go to sleep.
And if not, fake it really good.
I know. I feel like I could have made that very useful over the years.
Yeah, we transmogrified that and leaving you a lump of coal instead of giving you a. Okay. Let's sidetrack off of that for just a second. Go ahead.
No, the lump of coal thing is commonly misunderstood because in early Victorian times, which is when Dickens writes that story, a lump of coal is actually a pretty handsome gift for a poor person because that will keep your house warm through the night. A lump of coal is probably more than a poor person can even afford. The kind of coal that was typically burned in the coal stove in a poor person's house was more of the, just the byproduct, the dusty stuff. It didn't have lumps in it. If you gave somebody a big, handsome lump of coal, that probably would have been beyond their financial ability to afford, and it would have burned cleaner and hotter in their house, and they would have provided them with a happier Christmas Eve than they might have had otherwise. I mean, I'm not saying it's a super duper handsome gift, but it's not the insult that it is commonly made out to be.
It is made out to be an insult to keep kids of the modern era from being naughty.
Yes.
Just a blatant bribe and threat. Do you want to do a transition? We're going to continue on that thread. Which way?
I can keep going on this if you want me to.
I've got to dip out here in about 10 minutes to take my daughter to work, but we can pick up on that then. I want to make a quick jaunt through the counterposing of the Christmas spirit. The pagans celebrate almost an identical holiday during the winter solstice. It's got all kinds of names across all kinds of different cultures, but it is essentially the celebration of surviving the shortest day of the year and the rebirth of the sun and the proof that spring is coming and yada, yada, yada. In most of these cultures, there would be a particular animal, whether it was a pig or a goat or a sheep or something, that would be kept from the previous year through this winter. So you would have a group of yearlings and then one animal that's 2 years old. That animal would be slaughtered at the solstice, and the colors of Christmas represents how important this activity was to our earlier forebears. Red, green, and white. That is the color of blood on snow in a pine forest.
Boom.
Red, green, and white. And that was one of the features of the pagan holidays that went on that could not be extirpated by the Christian church. And so they just adopted it into the modern framework that you see today.
And it's also interesting to note that when we got our what we associate as our Christmas traditions, which we got from Britain, of course, Britain actually got them from the Germans because they were traditions that Prince Albert brought to Britain when he married Queen Victoria. Like the thing about going and chopping a tree down and bringing it into the house and festooning it with candles and putting gifts under it. That was completely...
You lucky bastard. My mother insisted that we dug that fucker up. Brought it in a pot, decorated it, let it live through the entire season, and then replant the damn thing in the yard. Sorry.
Yeah, we used to have a living tree too for a time when I was a kid. But yeah, but those traditions, you know, that we associated, that we commonly think of as Anglo-American Christmas traditions, straight from Coburg, straight from Prince Albert, when he first, you know, started doing this stuff, in which I guess would have been the early 1840s, when they first started having kids and a family. And you know how it is, everybody wants to emulate the royal family. All the English people said, well, this is pretty damn weird, but we will do it anyway, because obviously we want to emulate the queen and her husband and the royal family. So we will adopt these strange, bizarre German traditions and make them our own. And you know, nearly 200 years later, they still remain our own. And we don't care about where they came from because we've been doing them long enough that we don't need to care.
Damn right.
That is based to keep the tree alive. Yep.
You had like 25 of them in a row out there on the side of the property.
Except Prince Albert actually did it in a way that was contrary to the way he do it. They actually depicted this in the Victoria series that they made about 10 years ago. He went and chopped the tree down, and they actually suspended it from the ceiling and put the gifts under where the tree was suspended. So the tree wasn't actually sitting on the floor, but it was hanging from the rafters, in other words. And it was actually upside down from the way that we commonly associate a Christmas tree from, you know, it sits on the floor and it's in the same direction as when it was growing out of the ground, but suspended from the ceiling upside down. We didn't retain that part of the tradition, probably because it caused a lot of fires, I would guess, and probably a lot of people died fairly horrible, gruesome deaths from trying to do that in their own homes. So sometimes it's good when you dispense with certain portions of the tradition and keep the other ones that might be more sensible, but who knows? I can't say for sure.
It's obviously that time of the year is significant. The only places I know of that don't celebrate it especially are equator tribes and whatnot. The various, although there are a couple of those that actually had a very different, like the Mayans around the same time period during the transition of the sun there. They kind of did a bunch of blood sacrifices. So did the Norse, for that matter. they would do what wasn't the trip to Uppsala?
Yes, the Mesoamericans did enjoy their human sacrifice. That is for damn sure. But to your larger point, it's true that there has never really existed any culture on this planet that hasn't made some kind of commemoration around the portion of the year that goes from the harvest to the winter solstice. It is seen universally, and every culture arrived independently at this conclusion that it is seen as an important time of the year that is worthy of being marked and commemorated and having festivities associated with it. And it's one of the fascinating common threads that runs through all of human culture, when that everybody arrives at it in isolation, even without any outside contact. And it's just, one of those things. The harvest comes in, and it's a good. Go ahead.
I said, I'll be right back. Go hog wild.
Okay. I am. How about if I read out some Today in History? And if y'all get tired of hearing me read out Today in History, I will keep one eye on the chat. And, or if there's something that you want to talk about or ask a question about, do feel free to fire away. Okay. November 30th. That's what today is, right? In the year, what is this? In the year 883, Abu al-Abbas celebrates a victory parade in Baghdad, following the suppression of the Zanj Rebellion, the largest slave revolt in the Arab world. And they had a lot of slave revolts in the Arab world, so that's probably really saying something. In the year 978, the Franco-German War of 978 to 980, Holy Roman Emperor Otto II lifts the siege of Paris and withdraws. One of many sieges of Paris that have existed down through the ages. Paris has been laid siege to lots of times, and the Parisians usually surrendered, but, what do you do? 1707, Queen Anne's War, the Second Siege of Pensacola, comes to an end with the failure of the British Empire and their Creek allies to capture Pensacola, Spanish Florida. That's kind of an overlooked period in the colonial history of North America. There was a lot of fighting done over the Florida Peninsula, and the Spanish held on to it for quite a while before the English finally got a hold of it, and then it obviously subsequently became American, but that doesn't happen until the early part of the 19th century. 1718, the Great Northern War. King Charles XII of Sweden dies during a siege at the fortress of Fredrikstad in Norway. And what a bummer that is for King Charles XII. 1782, the American Revolutionary War, the Treaty of Paris. Representatives from the United States and Great Britain signed preliminary peace articles, later formalized as the 1783 Treaty of Paris, which I did a video about not too long ago. So you should go and watch that video after this show's over, if you are so inclined. 1786, the Grand Duchy of Tuscany under Pietro Leopoldo I becomes the first modern state to abolish the death penalty. 1786, that's pretty early on to abolish the death penalty. How about that? I don't know how I feel about that. I'm kind of a fan of the death penalty myself, but we'll just leave it at that. 1803, the Balmis expedition starts in Spain with the aim of vaccinating millions against smallpox in Spanish America and the Philippines, which obviously a worthwhile enterprise. We don't want people to have smallpox. And Dr. Edward Jenner, we can thank him for the fact that it doesn't exist anymore, even though it was kind of a hard sell. He was in one of my videos just the other day, as a matter of fact. He was responsible for the invention of the smallpox vaccine is one of the greatest discoveries in the history of human scientific inquiry. And what happened when he first came up with it? He was dismissed and shouted down as a crank and a heretic by the established mainstream medical authorities of the day because, people don't like to be wrong. But Jenner was right, and he eventually proved he was right. And all those other guys in the mainstream establishment were a bunch of freaking idiots. 1803, in New Orleans, Spanish representatives officially transfer the Louisiana Territory to the French First Republic. And it's only not too long after that, just a couple of years before Napoleon sells it to us. And And then we send Lewis and Clark out to see what's there. Doubled the size of our land territory. Only cost us $15 million. Napoleon thought he was getting a great deal. I think we got the better deal. Personally. 1853, the Crimean War. The Imperial Russian Navy under Pavel Nakhimov destroys the Ottoman fleet under Osman Pasha at Sinop, a seaport in northern Turkey. The Crimean War was a hell of a thing. I guess if you're British, you're probably more familiar with the Crimean War than Americans are. But the point of the thing being that the Crimean Peninsula has been a strategic choke point and object of conquest and attempted conquest for a hell of a long time, just as it is today between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And it's been that way for 1,000 years. It might be that way 1,000 years from now. There's nothing new under the sun in history. In other words, 1864, the Confederate Army of Tennessee, led by General John Bell Hood, suffers heavy losses in an attack on the Union Army of the Ohio under General John Schofield in the Battle of Franklin. 1872, the first ever international football match takes place at Hamilton Crescent, Glasgow, between Scotland and England. I want to see who won that. Who won the first ever Scotland versus... It was a scoreless tie, so you know it must be soccer. What an unexpected revelation that was.
Is soccer the only game you can end with no scores?
Yes. A scoreless tie used to be possible in hockey, but it's no longer possible anymore because all ties have been eliminated in hockey. I used to like ties in hockey, but, we can't have ties anymore because we can't have nice things. There's nothing wrong with a tie. Americans are just averse to sports games ending in a tie. I think you can still have a tie in the NFL, though they've tried really hard to make it so ties are next to impossible. But there's usually one or two ties in the NFL each year.
But is it ending tie, or do they go into like a dead, what do they call it, a overtime and then double overtime?
Well, in the NFL in the regular season, I believe you just play an entire extra quarter, and if the score remains tied, then it's a tie. In the playoffs, obviously, if it's an elimination game, then you have to have a winner. So you just keep on playing until somebody wins, and you're basically playing without a clock at that point. And in hockey now, whereas you used to play a 5-minute overtime, and if it was still tied, it was a tie. And so you had lots of ties, but now what they do is they play the 5-minute overtime, and instead of being 5-on-5, it's 3-on-3. So, which really opens up the ice surface and creates a lot more scoring opportunities. So, but then at the end of the overtime, even if nobody has still scored, then they go to a penalty shootout, just like they do in soccer when there's an elimination game and it's still tied at the end of extra time.
I mean, let's be honest. Hockey is just frozen soccer with a puck.
It really is.
I mean, fight me. I don't know what to tell you. It's lacrosse and hockey mixed up on ice. It's wild.
Yeah, it is. Hockey is what happened when Canadians tried to play soccer.
We had to go oot in a boot.
Out in a boat.
Oot in a boot. I don't know what you're arguing about. I got a real good Canadian friend of mine that I listen to talk a lot. And sometimes when I'm talking to him, I do this on purpose, but I can't do it on purpose. I can do it when I'm talking to him. But I'll start talking in his accent, but I'll do it kind of slow so he doesn't notice it immediately. There'll be like 6 or 7 of us in whatever stupid StreamYard meeting or private doohickey or whatever we're doing at the time. And next thing you know, I'm over here talking just like him.
Oh yeah, I'm one of those people. I've had two week-long trips to Canada in my life, and right on cue, I start speaking in their dialect and accent if I'm there for more than a few days, and you can hear yourself doing it. And you still can't stop. It's kind of a funny thing.
But I do it on purpose. I full on do it on purpose. When I go to the islands, I talk like the islanders or as close as I can to it, right? I think I told you before about when me and my wife went on our honeymoon. We found this local little bookstore, and it's like the weirdest little hole in the wall ever. And we found a locally printed, locally sourced book called Gula Fauna, which is a childhood version of explaining how a specific type of island patois derived from the King's English, right? And so it goes through, it says a whole bunch of different useful phrases in Gullah and then translates them into English and then shows you how to further speak the language, kind of like a weird pig Latin kind of thing. Like you drop certain consonants in certain usages.
And one fascinating example of that is the people in the Pitcairn Islands, who of course are the descendants of the Bounty mutineers, and they still speak a dialect of English that is like a perfect blend of 18th century Royal Navy sailor talk and the language of the King James Bible, because those were their only influences linguistically, and they were completely closed to the outside world for hundreds of years, and so that's still the way they talk. They had a King James Bible, and they had a bunch of people who knew how to speak sailor English, and so those were the only influences on their local dialect, and then they persist right up to the present day.
Would that be pursuant to the concept of a cargo cult?
No, I don't think so, because they were very much not wanting to be found, at least as long as any of the Bounty mutineers were still alive. Then they didn't. Once all the mutineers were finally dead, which didn't actually take that long, then they were much more amenable to visitors coming by to hang out for a little while. But a cargo cult is specifically isolated island tribes, mostly in New Guinea, the Dutch East Indies, present-day Indonesia, whatever you want to call them, that they very little exposure to the outside world, and all of a sudden, during the Second World War, you had Americans or Britons showing up. They would build an airfield, they would build a control tower, and magically, these vehicles would descend from the sky that had a bunch of food and equipment and delicious, wonderful, useful things on board them. And these simple island villagers didn't really have the ability to distinguish between an airplane and a creature. They kind of thought it was some sort of magical angel, and then the war ends and everybody goes home and the control tower gets stripped down. But from their limited experience, they think, well, if we build a runway and we build a thing that looks like that control tower they used to have, then the magic angels will come from the sky and bring the cargo we want, because it was really great when those magic beings from the sky used to bring us cargo. We want more cargo, so let's build a control tower and maybe the cargo will come. And what a fascinating exercise in anthropology that is.
It is. It is an amazing example of religious development independent of legitimate influence, right? They once the devices and the mechanizations and all of the people, the white folk left, right? The people that were left had to sit around and explain to the next generation why these things existed in the landscape and how they came to be, you know. And can you imagine trying to tell your 5, 6, 7-year-old child who's like, why is this all clear of trees and what is that over there? And you're like, okay, so when I was a kid, these magical white folks came from the sky on these. First, they came from the ocean, and a whole bunch of people died. And then it got better because they built this, they made this to bring these beasts down from the sky that was full of food and energy and things that made people warm, and really nice fabrics and amazing tools. And they're where we figured out iron. They're where we figured this out, that out, you know. There's one particular cargo cult that developed, and I can't remember the name of the island that it popped up on, but it was not actually visited in World War II by any major part of any Navy that we know of.
Right.
It's just
they just got word from somebody, from the people from some other island, that stuff had happened, and then they said, "Well,
Yes.
shit, it might as well be worth a shot, right?
No,
Build us a
this
runway and a control tower."
was a byproduct of an English pilot crashing, surviving for 8 or 9 months until he saw a ship and he popped his freaking life raft and rowed out to the ship and left. And a cargo cult concept, a cult built up around where the plane had crashed. And even after the Americans showed up and picked up all the stuff and loaded it up, which from the reports of the trip there, they did not make contact with natives. The natives watched, but they didn't do anything. And they got all the parts of the airplane they could. They loaded it up and left. And the people came back and rebuilt a wooden version of the crashed airplane with all the little metal pieces they could find stuck in the places they would have been on the airplane. Details, bro.
Here is a list that the Australian anthropologist Martha McIntyre gave, what she considers the classic elements and characteristics of a cargo cult. Number 1, they involve ritual activities that in some way imitate or mimic the actions associated with whites and Europeans. Number 2, the activities are aimed at effecting transformations and or reversals in status, often associated with skin color, and wealth and power for its adherents. Number 3, they involve stories of the loss of skills, goods, and knowledge to white people, often those who colonized them, through some moral failure or offense. Some of the rites or practices aim to redeem these failures in order to effect the transformation. They have charismatic local leaders. They have strong nativist elements. That is, they aim at advancing the political interests of local people by appealing to the reinstatement of specific traditional practices, and they see their movement as one that reclaims self-determination and independence from white foreign control. That one is a little bit ironic. They entail beliefs in the return of ancestors, bringing wealth in the form of money, European goods, or cargo. They include utopian and or millenarian ideas of a future in which people will not have to labor. They have continued over many decades, changing slightly but maintaining core beliefs and practices. So it's, in other words, it's a great way for local leaders to turn it into a sort of moral and ethical litmus test to keep their populations under control. That they have a way of saying, well, back when we all behaved ourselves really well and we were better people than we were today, the magic white people brought their magic sky creatures and gave us all that cargo. Don't you want the cargo to come again? So you better start behaving like your grandpa did if you want the cargo to come back. And what a great political control mechanism that is.
And that is such an ironic approach to the interpretation of a cargo cult.
It really is.
The language used in that article is so weighted and ungainly, it almost means nothing.
I know. Let's see.
Dude, it's almost tasty. Nowadays, an article like that would be laughed out of academia. It would be completely shut down, but specifically because of the language that it's using. They would just shut that down. They'd be like, look, rewrite it, framework it a little bit better, whatever.
And you're familiar with the islanders who venerate Prince Philip as a god, right? You've heard about that one.
Hit me with that one, bro. Hit me.
That was when when did they visit? Okay, I'll just read the article. The Prince Philip movement is a religious sect followed by the Castome people around the villages of Yahonan and Yake on the southern Tanna Island in Vanuatu. It is a cargo cult of the Yahonan tribe who believe in the divinity of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, consort to Queen Elizabeth II. According to ancient tales, there was a son of a mountain spirit who then traveled to a distant land. There he married a powerful lady. One day he would return. He was sometimes said to be a brother to John Frum, which is the name of a different cargo cult on a different island. The people of the area had seen the respect accorded to Queen Elizabeth II by the colonial officials and concluded that her husband, Prince Philip, must be the son referred to in their legends, and that the distant land refers to Britain. It is unclear just when this belief came about, but it was probably sometime in the 1950s or 60s. It was strengthened by the royal couple's official visit to Vanuatu in 1974, when a few villagers had the opportunity to actually see Prince Philip from a distance. The prince was not then aware of the sect, but it was brought to his attention several years later by John Champion, the British resident commissioner in the New Hebrides. Champion suggested that Prince Philip send them a portrait of himself. He agreed and sent a signed official photograph. The villagers responded by sending him a traditional pig-killing club. In compliance with their request, the prince sent a photograph of himself posing with the club. Another photograph was sent in 2000. All three photographs were kept by the chief of the tribe.
Request.
They must have been bummed when he died.
Go ahead.
Oh, here I go. In April 2021, the sect mourned Prince Philip's death. Village Chief Albi said he was terribly, terribly sorry, and tribal leader Chief Yapa sent his condolences to the royal family. The Union flag was flown at half-staff on the grounds of the, I can't pronounce that word, but it must refer to the chief's hut. Referring to the Queen, Chief Jack Mala said though the Duke is dead, they still have a connection with the mother of the royal family. So in other words, they are living in a patriarchal society. So when the Queen and Prince Albert came, or I mean Prince Philip came to visit their island, it simply wasn't in their realm of consciousness that it would have been she that was in charge and he was just her consort. They figured that he must have been the powerful man who was foretold in their legends, and the amount of respect and veneration that was showed to him, confirmed the origin story of their religion. And so sometimes that's all it takes. Just a couple of white folks showing up, being treated like bigwigs by the locals. You can build an entire state religion out of that. And how fascinating that is anthropologically.
So let's do some of our alternate history precognition, right? Hypothetically speaking, World War II ends with a mutually assured destruction of all the major powers in the world, right? Poof. Right. Communications down, the different civilizations balkanize, and the only consistent civilization that comes out of that conflict is a cargo cult out of the Polynesian Islands, who basically sail to the freaking world, eventually convincing a handful of people to revere the cargo gods and move on, explaining what all the things in the world are, what a different world we would live in.
And there would probably be a non-zero chance of that happening. And here's a few words on the cult of John Frum, which I believe is the most famous of all the cargo cults. John Frum is a figure associated with.
Hold on.
Sorry?
John Frum. The reason this man is named John Frum is because they don't know where he was from. They thought it was his name. John Correct. Frum. And they didn't understand the next word, and so it was just never recorded.
Yeah, he introduced himself as I'm John from such and such, and all they remembered was John Frum. And that was all it took for him to become their deity. He's a figure associated with cargo cults on the island of Tanna in Vanuatu, formerly the New Hebrides. He is often depicted as an American World War II serviceman who will bring wealth and prosperity to the people if they follow him. In a 1960 BBC documentary, British broadcaster David Attenborough asked the locals what Frum looked like and was told, "He looked like you, he got white face, he tall man, he lived long South America." In the 1990s, there were still reportedly over 5,000 members of the John Frum movement. However, belief in John Frum is in decline. As of 2022, there are fewer than 500 practitioners. Currently, only the village of Lamakara is faithful to the John Frum faith on the island of Tanna. The rest of the island has mostly been converted by Christian missionaries. The religion centering on John Frum arose no later than the late 1930s, when Vanuatu was known as the New Hebrides. The religion may have originated as early as the 1910s, according to a claim from 1949. The movement was influenced by existing religious practice in the Sulphur Bay area of Tanna, particularly the worship of a god whose name I can't pronounce, a god associated with a mountain whose name I can't pronounce. In one analysis of the cult, the figure was first known as John Broom, who was believed by followers to one day return from a distant land to sweep away the white colonials and return riches to the island. In some versions of the story, a native man named Manahivi, using the alias John Frum, began appearing among the native peoples of Tanna dressed in a Western-style coat, assuring the people he would bring them houses, clothes, food, and transport.
Wow.
They have such simple needs, these cargo cultists.
Well, I mean, they live on tropical islands in the middle of the ocean, eating nothing but fish and game that they catch for themselves. It's beautiful.
They want you to just bring them some food that they don't have to kill themselves. Maybe some clothes that they don't have to weave out of whatever the islanders make their clothes out of.
A metal knife.
Yeah. Oh my God. The greatest of all cargo.
Yes. Yeah. Metal. That you don't have to smelt yourself.
Yep. Something I can make fish hooks out of, and I'll be the biggest man in the village then.
Right. Exactly. Although I've always wondered, I've always had a bit of an issue with, the classical description of putting down the noble savages with our superior firepower. How much superior is a single shot musket over a bow?
Yeah, and the first thing I think of when you say that is the Battle of Rorke's Drift.
Zulus?
Which I'm sure. Yep.
Yeah. That's exactly which they figured it out.
Yeah, which the movie Zulu was about, of course, and that was 150 British infantrymen with rifles against 4,000 or 5,000 Zulus with spears and shields made out of whatever their shields were made out of. But hey, it was a closely run thing, but the guys with the guns won eventually. But it was a hell of a battle, that's for damn sure.
It is to this day studied in virtually every military academy all around the earth, but for the specific reason that there is no explicable reason why the Zulus lost. They should have overrun that position. Historically, the reason that's given that the Zulus lost that battle at Rorke's Drift is they did not know how many Englishmen were in there, and they thought there were 1,000, and so they never rushed them.
And didn't their commander tell them perform some ritual that was supposed to make them impervious to the British bullets, or is that another battle I'm thinking of?
That was it. That was the one. He I can't remember what the details were. I don't know that I ever read the details of it, but I think it was the second. What was that, like 3-day battle? Something like that?
Yeah, and the British strength was 140, and the Zulu strength was between 3,000 and 4,000.
Right.
And it goes from 22 January to 23 January 1879. And
yeah.
The British were being commanded by a couple of lieutenants, one guy from the Royal Engineers and the other guy from the 24th Regiment of Foot, Bromhead, who was famously played by Michael Caine in his first major role, was in Zulu, if I'm not mistaken.
There's one more feature of that battle. Weren't the British on the only source of water in like 30 miles or something like that of potable water?
I believe so, and that's why they had built that particular encampment right there, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, and in order for the Zulus to gather water, they had to send a significant portion of their force out to collect it 20 miles away or something like that.
And the Zulus had just previously defeated the British in the Battle of Isandlwana.
Yes, that's
early in the day on 22 January, and then they had to travel 6 miles to get to Rorke's Drift to engage in that attack. And so that was probably That was probably a pretty grueling march because you're in January, you're right in the middle of the southern hemisphere summer, so it must have been
Right.
pretty goddamn hot.
I bet you. Yes, sir. Just can you imagine charging? All right, so let's look at it from the Zulus' perspective. This is a enemy that has never been bested on any field of battle that you've ever heard of. Anytime the English take the field, they take the field. That's history as far as you know, right?
Yep.
But you beat them yesterday. You won. We won.
Yeah. And we defeated them when they had more guys than they have at this place. So how can we not win again? It's inconceivable that we don't win again.
That's true. But one of the critical points of the failure of the Zulu to commit was the lack of knowledge of how many troops were in there. They knew that the previous location, what was the other battle, the first battle?
Isandlwana.
They knew that place was understaffed, and they assumed that some of the people that were supposed to be at that previous place must be over here at the water source, right?
Right.
And so they assumed
Rourke's Drift was mostly a hospital. I mean, many of the defenders were actually wounded men who had to be dragged out of bed and had rifles propped up in their hands. I mean, that's how closely run of a thing it was.
Next week, I want to go over the Battle of the Dead Men. I think that would be a very good one to dive into. We'll do that.
You know what other battle we should dive into is the Battle of the Crater.
Where's that
one? When a couple of thousand Union men just ran into the bottom of the crater and got trapped, and it became a turkey shoot for the rebels.
How have I not heard?
I'll pull it up.
Oh my God!
I'm sure you've heard of it. I'll start reading out the article, and it'll start being familiar to you.
Okay, I accept your terms, sir.
All right, we are 30 July 1864. The Battle of the Crater took place. Siege of Petersburg. It was ancillary to the Siege of Petersburg. It occurs on Saturday, July 30th, 1864. Army of Northern Virginia against the Army of the Potomac. After weeks of preparation, on July 30th, Union forces exploded a mine across from General Ambrose Burnside's 9th Corps sector, blowing a gap in the Confederate defenses of Petersburg. Instead of being a decisive advantage to the Union, this precipitated a rapid deterioration in the Union position. Unit after unit charged into and around the crater, where most of the soldiers milled about in confusion in the bottom of the crater. Grant considered this failed assault the saddest affair I have ever witnessed in this war. The Confederates quickly recovered and launched several counterattacks led by Brigadier General William Mahone. The breach was sealed off, and the Union forces were repulsed with severe casualties, while Brigadier General Edward Ferrero's division of black soldiers was badly mauled. It may have been Grant's best chance to end the siege of Petersburg. Instead, the soldiers settled in for another 8 months of trench warfare. In other words, they had the Union had they had tunneled under and planted some explosives because they wanted to blow a big hole in the Confederate line, but they didn't really have an effective tactical plan for what to do after the explosives went off. So everybody just kind of ran into the crater, and that was a very, very bad thing to do. And they all got trapped and just completely shot to shit by the defenders.
Right. Well, the defenders were capable of merely backing up a few feet and using to try to cast down by the crater as defensive bulwarks until they could improve them. The attackers would have to cross the empty ground of the crater, and here's the double-edged sword of using sappers like this. The soldiers that you're sending into the breach are basically blind, deaf, and dumb when they go in there. The blast of those types of explosives are so huge and so loud and throw up so much dust that the first ones through the breach have no idea where they're going, what's happening, what's going on. And neither does the last guy. Think that through.
Yeah.
So,
and all they know how to do is charge when they're told to charge. So when they hear the bugle call, they just go forward when they're told to go forward. And if you don't have effective communication from unit to unit and unit to higher command, you can get a travesty like this in which the Union force took almost 50% casualties. Their total force was 8,500, of which they lost 3,798, which even by Civil War standards is just a fearsome bloodbath.
That's a massacre.
That is a massacre, indeed.
Even if you have a plan for what to do after the sapper charge goes off, if the people involved in the plan are incapable of seeing, hearing, and communicating, there's no guarantee that the plan will move forward into the fog of war. And that is a perfect example.
And it needs to be made clear and impressed upon all the unit commanders before you set off the explosives that there is no need for us to charge in and try to take the crater. We are trying to subdue the men that have been displaced by the crater that our explosives have created. So we don't just want to run down into the bottom of the hole and turn it into a turkey shoot for Johnny Reb. We want to stay on the high ground and, we have created a breach in their lines, but we don't want to go where the breach is because that's where the big hole is. We want to exploit the confusion that our explosion has created among the forces that are on either side of the breach we've created before they have a chance to consolidate their defenses. And it shouldn't have been that complicated of a message to pass on if you had, competent commanders in the field.
Bangalore's would have fixed this.
Bangalore's would have fixed this. Bangalore's would have fixed a lot of things in that war.
The difference between a sapper charge and a Bangalore is the shape of the depression created. The Bangalore creates a nice, lovely, clean path to walk down. It's a straight line. You run, and it even throws up a little bit of a berm on both sides when it goes. It cuts all the wire out. There might be a few bits of metal and whatnot in there, and
whoever invented the Bangalore was a national hero because that was the first thing we ever came up with that could effectively breach barbed wire just like a knife through butter.
Yup. And that was also, man portable. It takes a squad to move them, but you don't make a squad of Bangalore carriers. You put 3 Bangalore carriers in every squad. And then when they get to the place they want to make the breach, you see how many Bangalores you got and you link them all together like one of those old toy tractors that you used to be able to get from like the He-Man.
Oh yeah, it's got, if I'm not mistaken, it's got 3 components to it, and you screw them together largely like a 3-piece pool cue, and then you just pass it to the forward guy, and he sticks it all the way into the.
It can go so much further than that. Each person carries a 3-piece set, and you can put the 3 pieces together, and they all put their 3 pieces together, and then you take the 3-piece set and put those 3 together, and you can make a 30-foot long freaking pathway to walk straight into wherever you're going. As long as you can run more of them out, they link together with blasting caps. They're freaking genius, dude.
I know. I want to pull up some information on that son of a bitch.
It's one of those things that seems like a no-duh situation, like Velcro, but you have to have witnessed that situation as such a calamity, the trench warfare and the barbed wire, and have an epiphany moment. You have to think outside the box. Rather than cutting all of it, why don't we just blow it slab to shit? Sounds like a very American invention to me.
Wow, it's designed in 1912, but it's never brought to bear, at least not by Americans, until the Second World War, 1943. The official name is the Bangalore Torpedo. An explosive charge placed within one of several connected tubes. It's used by combat engineers to clear obstacles that would otherwise require them to approach directly, possibly under fire. It is sometimes colloquially referred to as a Bangalore mine, Bangor, or simply Bangalore. as well as a pole charge. Per United States Army Field Manual 5-250, Section 1 through 14, page 1 through 12, the primary use of the torpedo is clearing paths through wire obstacles and heavy undergrowth. It will clear a 3 to 4 meter wide path through wire obstacles. And man, when you're trying to get a platoon off a beach, a 3 to 4 meter wide path is like a gift from God, dude. Are you kidding me?
Right. Dude, and also, part of the effect that it has is to blast that 3 or 4 foot wide path completely clear anything that's not rock, or 3 feet deep of sand. And so, when they were approaching the specific beaches they were approaching, they were going through dunes initially for the most part. And those Bangalores were worth their weight in gold, bro. It was the Bangalores that got the armor on the beach. It was the Bangalores that got the troops off the beach. It was the Bangalores that laid out a double handful of the eagle's nest here, there, and everywhere up there. All of the machine guns.
Without those things, I mean, your entire company is pinned down for God knows how long, half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, while you're trying to clip through that damn barbed wire with a pair of wire cutters. I mean,
or calling it airstrikes and artillery from battleships so close to your platoon, you're probably going to be taking some of your own guys out, trying to cut the barbed wire in a line that y'all could actually advance through. That's a nightmare.
Here's the vital statistics. Bangalore torpedoes were packed in wooden crates that contained 10 torpedo sections, 10 connecting sleeves, and 1 nose sleeve. The total weight of a crate was 176 pounds. Each torpedo section was 5 feet long, 2¼ inches in diameter, and weighed 13 pounds. So yeah, it basically takes 2 guys to move the entire thing, but it's man portable for purposes man portable in terms of the fact that you don't need a vehicle to move it. In other words,
well, a single unit. They were useful in single units and put together. The beauty of it was the fact that 2 of them, 20 foot long, would make a 15 foot wide road that a tank could drive through. That's what made them so damned useful for D-Day. Not in the initial insertion into the French countryside, but then the advancement of the armor. Without the Bangalores, none of that shit. It would have taken a week.
Yep, and we couldn't have just done it with Hobart's funnies either. Even though Hobart's funnies were brilliant inventions in their own right, we needed something like the Bangalore in order to make our purpose actually feasible in the real world. Each end of the torpedo was filled with 4 inches of TNT booster, while the middle section contained an 80-20 Amatol mixture. The explosive charge weighed about 9 pounds. Each end of the torpedo had a recess to accommodate a standard Corps of Engineers blasting cap. Torpedo sections could be attached together via spring clip-equipped connecting sleeves. A blunt nose sleeve was provided so that the assembled torpedoes could be pushed through obstacles or across terrain without getting stuck.
Yep. Absolute genius.
And yeah, I mean, just untold numbers of men lived through that first day who would not have lived through that first day without the Bangalore existing. And so it's one of those battlefield combat engineer inventions whose utility cannot be possibly overstated. I
propose that the breach would not have occurred. What was it? Was it Sword Coast that breached? It was Sword Beach. I can't remember which was the first breach. Dog one.
I don't know which. I
think it was Sword. Omaha. My bad.
Omaha.
It was Omaha Beach.
Sword was British.
Yeah. And the other one was freaking Canadian, but anyway, Juno. Australian. Right. Yeah. So Juno was the breach. No.
Well, I thought Omaha was Omaha and Utah were where all of the heaviest shit went down, which were our 2 beaches, obviously. So we got to deal with the worst of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was even though Omaha was the most heavily defended, it is also where we made the first breakthrough because we're badasses.
Well, I mean, that kind of goes to some stuff that Sun Tzu said about appearing strong where you are weak and weak where you are strong. We attacked them there with a huge force, not really expecting to breach. It was the possession of Bangalore technology that got us the breach that was needed. Otherwise, I fully believe it would have been breached in Juneau.
And hell, we were halfway through the first day, and Hitler was still convinced that Normandy was a feint, and the real attack was coming in Calais, and he wouldn't release his armor to go from Calais to help reinforce Normandy. And what a spectacular fuck up on his part.
Rommel was losing his freaking giblets about the whole thing. Like, he was like foaming at the mouth. He had been preaching that the exact invasion that we did.
He did every possible thing he could do to make those defenses as robust as possible. And he just did not get any help from his Fuhrer because Hitler just couldn't accept for the life of him that they would actually stage, that we would actually stage the main part of the invasion across the widest part of the channel to the area that he had defended most heavily. But that's what we did, and it messed with his head so badly that he just couldn't effectively respond to it, and wasted an entire day thinking that the real attack was coming at Calais when it was never coming at Calais. But that was also a lot of that has to be chalked up to the deception plan.
Yes, that
and all
was
the fake
brilliant.
and all the fake radio traffic and all the blow up rubber tanks and that whole, I can't remember the name of the operation. I should be able to remember it, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. But and yeah, he was completely convinced that the main force was going to be under the command of Patton, and it was going to be targeted at Calais. And meanwhile, Patton was just sitting in an English country house somewhere, pissed off that he didn't get to participate in the invasion. But my God, how well the deception worked.
The Phantom Army called the first U.S. Army group FUSAG. Completed.
Yes, FUSAG. That's it.
Yeah, dude, those guys. The planning of that branch of insanity was serendipitous as hell, and basically came down, and I can't remember the individuals involved, to a general having a conversation with a literal stage magician who they were not discussing tactics, they were discussing magic. And they had the conversation about how the biggest, most important thing you can do is make sure the audience is not looking where the trick is taking place. And that grew into the concept of some of the funnies tanks as a byproduct of funding that went that way. But mostly it was the inflatable tanks, these weird wooden boats, these freaking, dude, genius.
And a lot of the guys we had engaged in that work were Hollywood special effects guys. And they acquitted themselves just brilliantly, because the Germans were absolutely, completely fooled, because it was not a half-assed deception operation. It contained deceptions on every single level. You had fake vehicles, fake radio traffic, fake troop movements, every single thing you could do to create confusion and a false impression on the part of the enemy as to where the main body of the invasion was going to take place, we did. And you take any one of the ingredients out, and it might not be a successful deception operation. And it's, again, the fact that it created such confusion on the enemy side resulted, just like the Bangalore did on the ground level, as the result is that a lot of men lived who would have been massacred on the beach otherwise. And is it that time already? Am I doing the thing?
No, you have a donation. You should acknowledge it. Super chat.
Oh, Alfie, thanks you so very much for the $2 super chat. I sure do appreciate it. I will do any funny song and dance you want me to do in exchange for that $2 super chat.
I made something for them.
This one's for you, buddy. Nice.
This one's for you. Nice. Yeah, I can do that. See how talented I am.
We're good at this.
Yeah, all you confused me. I didn't know if it was time to do the thing. It's almost time to do the thing.
It is almost time to do the thing. I want to discuss a real quick jump into the Dead Man. the dead officer that never existed. They took a bunch of fake
Operation
D-Day
Mincemeat.
mincemeat. Yes, sir. Thank you. God, I wish I could remember names like that. They put a bunch of fake plans that basically was exactly what Rommel was expecting, right? He was expecting the Calais thing, and that's what they painted out was everything that they had been warned would be, that this was going to be a catastrophe. There was no taking Fortress Europa without the deception, period.
Yes. And every single aspect of the deception, you know, right from Operation Mincemeat all the way up to the blow up tanks and the fake troop movements. You couldn't make the thing work without every single one of the ingredients, and it's a big part of what helped the invasion be successful, in addition to the actual combat that was done, and all of that contributes to why it's probably the most audacious military operation in world history right up to the present day.
Facts. Do the thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks ever so much for joining us here on the Blast Radius tonight. We sure hope that you had a fantastic Thanksgiving weekend with your families and friends and those you love. We hope you've eaten turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes for the past 10 meals like I have. That's what makes it the best week of the year. We will see you back here next Sunday evening, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific, same time, same place. As we always do, we will talk about some fun, edifying things, as is our habit, including cargo cults, including Bangalores, including obscure medieval European history. You never know what we might get into. So, yeah, we hope you have a great day tomorrow and an edifying day after that and a thoroughly fulfilling week. And we will see you next time. Get off my lawn.
This one's for you, buddy. Nice.
Good Lord. It's just